It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more, care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets, Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice. It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more, care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets, Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to your weekly dose of genealogy with seasoning with BlackProGen Live. My name is True Lewis, your co-host for the evening, and we're welcoming everyone that's tuning in from all over. And we just want to say thank you for taking your time out on this Tuesday night to talk genealogy and family history. So now I'm going to turn over the mic to your host, Nika Smith.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining on this Valentine's Day Eve. Thank you so much, True, for passing the baton over. It's sort of a chilly baton because it definitely is the Winter Olympics. If you've been watching that, it's been going all the way down. So, yeah, we've got a lot to get to, a lot of content. So let's go ahead and jump into what the subject of the evening is going to be for tonight. Researching the formerly enslaved is not impossible, but can be challenging and take time. Learn the nuts and bolts of researching this segment of our ancestors, the emotional aspects of the search, and how it can add breadth to your family history project. Thanks so much for joining us for the 51st episode of BlackProGen Live tonight, entitled Finding and Tracing Enslaved Ancestors. Have a question or comment? Join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat on YouTube to the top right of your screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, don't forget you can weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or using the hashtag BlackProGen. Have you ever been like, man, I can't believe I missed that episode live. I need a reminder. Well, you know what? Here is your reminder to set reminders. All you need to do is head to my YouTube page and click set reminder under the episode you're interested in, or simply subscribe to my channel and you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live. I actually just, listed episodes going all the way up to June. So be sure to hit that set reminder button so that you can make sure that you are alerted whenever everything is going on for us here on YouTube. Since 2013, the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute has provided an amazing learning experience for genealogists and researchers. The Institute, also known commonly as MAGGIE, is the only African American focused event offering a total of 48 classes over 3 days, offering a comprehensive genealogical education experience of the benefit for the beginner, the intermediate researcher, and the professional. Join us from July 10th through the 12th, 2018 at the Genealogy Center at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana for the 5th installment of MAGGIE, the Teaching Institute. For more information and to register, please visit maggieinstitute.org. And before we get started too good, let me introduce tonight's special guest, who is Christopher E. Haley, the Director of Research for the Study of the Legacy of Slavery in Maryland at the Maryland State Archives and Director of the Utopia Film Festival in Prince George's County. Additionally, he has served on the following boards: Annapolis Film Festival, Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Foundation, Historic London Town Foundation, Jake Savage Foundation, and the Annapolis Arts Alliance Foundation. His script for the 2004 The Reconciliation Walk for Slavery and Pittance, held in Annapolis on September 29th, helped garner the Maryland Tourism Global, the Lord, I've got tongue tied tonight. Maryland Tourism Council Global Marketing Award for the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Foundation. He has spoken on genealogy, African American history, and self empowerment on many occasions, including the 2002 African American Genealogical Conference in Los Angeles, California, the 2000 Millennium of Ethiopia celebration in Washington, D.C., the 2008 and 2007 Federation of Genealogical Societies conventions, the 2013 Texas Library Association, the 2014 Afro American Historical Genealogical Society in Nashville, Tennessee, 2014 President's Day Address in the Maryland Old House of Delegates Chamber, and at the 2016 International Roots Festival in the Gambia. As an actor, performer, and writer, he has appeared on HBO's The Wire, whoop, one of my favorite shows, TV Once for My Man, the PBS special Partners of the Heart, and in productions of Ain't Misbehavin', Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jesus Christ Superstar, 6 Degrees of Separation, and Godspell. Written the radio play The Courtship of Joe and Eddie, poetry book Obsessions, both published in 1998, and several short films, including The Studio, which garnered him a 2001 Individual Artist Award from the Anne Arundel County Arts Council. The story of his DNA test that resulted in his discovery and reunion with relatives from the British Isles in 2009 was covered by innumerable news outlets, including USA Today and the Huffington Post. So today, please give a internet or virtual hand clap for our guest for the evening, Mr. Christopher Haley, as well as our panelists who go ahead and come off on mute. It is Black Panther Week, so we want to go ahead and get all of our glory, our bright glory reflected. Everybody's here. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself, Chris. Let's go ahead and introduce the panel to everybody. First person to my left is Ellen Fernandez-Sacco.
Hey, it's Ellen Fernandez-Sacco from Tampa. I'm looking forward to going to Wakanda pretty soon.
Sorry.
I'm going to Wakanda on Thursday.
Right, exactly.
All right, James.
Good evening, everybody. This is James Morgan coming to you from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I think I'm probably one of the few people who got not only a portion of Wakandan, but also some Zamundan in my ancestry DNA results.
To be loved, to be loved. Oh, what a feeling to be loved. Someone to kiss. Linda.
Hey, everybody. I'm Linda Sims coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. I am going to be in Wakanda on Thursday. Good to be here.
Yes. All right. True Lewis, when are you heading to Wakanda?
Ours is going to be Sunday at 1400, which is 2:00 for you civilians.
It sounds like you're going with all the military folks, and we got to welcome Chris, and he's bright and colorful tonight as well, joining us from Maryland.
Yes, I love yellow. Yeah, I was born in Wakanda, so I knew all about the Black and the Panther. So all about me.
Yes, and let me tell you that first Karen Galloway had to remind me it. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I didn't even say anything about Happy Fat Tuesday. If you are Louisianan, either by birth or by proxy because your family's from the area, or you're from Alabama, Southern Alabama, happy Mardi Gras, happy belated Lundi Gras. Hopefully you celebrated with the king cake, caught some beads. You're going to go get your ashes tomorrow, all that good stuff. So yes, happy Mardi Gras, happy Fat Tuesday to everybody. I neglected to say that. That's horrible because I was thinking about it when I was devouring that bowl of gumbo earlier.
Hey, you know something, Nika? That's how big this movie is. Mardi Gras then took a back seat to the Black Panther movie coming out.
I know, right?
Look. We better hope that the sequel doesn't come out in December or Kwanzaa. You're gonna forget about it, all right?
You're right. You're right. Yeah, the chat room was like, "Nigga, I can't believe you." And you guys see, look, I sort of wore the colors, so I was thinking about it. I was really thinking about. I mean, seriously, y'all, it was obscene how I was tearing up that gumbo tonight. Like it was really bad. But we've got chatters coming in from all over the place. Some of our, folks that always join us. We've got folks from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Hey, Robin Foster, Atlanta, Georgia, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Hampton, Virginia, Central Maryland, Central Virginia, Richmond, Texas, Milwaukee, Massachusetts. Lots of happy Mardi Gras. Long Island, New York. And Fairfield, California. Hey, Clarice, girl, 707. I see you. All right. Gosh, I love the Bay. Love the Bay. Love the Bay. We'll always love the Bay. So we've got a lot to talk about. And New Orleans, yes, Karen Royal is down there. Did you catch a coconut today? Were you on St. Charles Street? Because that's where my family goes to line up for, Mardi Gras. We actually need a whole show on Mardi Gras and what that is and how that's so much a part of the culture. We sure do. But tonight's subject matter, there are a lot of people who are interested in tracing their enslaved ancestors. In fact, that's probably, I said, outside of trying to figure out if you're Native American, I would say that's probably number 2 on the list of things that people want to find out about. Who were their enslaved ancestors? Can they find out who the slave owner is? And probably even more, can we get back to the ship that they came on, and can we get back to the actual location in Africa? And so that is what we're going to talk about tonight, is how you can do that, and what takes place. Karen said she was on Claiborne Avenue. We got to touch base off, because in Mardi Gras culture, everybody's family has a particular street that they go on. They usually don't deviate from that. Like, we were always on St. Charles, and there was a particular block, and you would have to leave at 5 a.m., or maybe 4 to go and get your spot. We'd pitch a tent. We had a porta potty. It's a whole system of stuff that goes on. And she said it was under the bridge, so I know exactly where she was. So anywho, all right, going back to the subject matter tonight, let's talk about enslaved people, finding and tracing enslaved people. So for the panel, Chris, you can answer this first. What are common misconceptions about enslaved people that we all hear from time to time?
But I'll try to speak, because this will be something. Conception is that everyone was enslaved. I think that have to embrace and accept and be open to as people of color. That the first line that you should travel in doing genealogy is that core line, which no matter what, which is to say that perhaps your ancestor Benjamin Banneker or Anthony Johnson into the 16 as being a free person. First line you should always take is the normal line, which is to say your oral history, confirm oral history, your death, your marriage, your census record, Civil War, all the way as far back can go before a roadblock happens. So I think that's the first misconception, that everyone had to have been enslaved, and once it gets to, oh well, give up. So that's the first out of their minds. Not to say that often, but not to already assume it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think Chris, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm gonna have True work with you in the chat area, so she can get you to where you're situated. But I was able to get enough from what you were saying to basically to reiterate what Chris just said, is basically that you want to go the traditional route. You still want to look at the traditional sources, things like oral history. You want to trace your family from you going backwards. You want to take the traditional route instead of trying to jump, literally go from Nika back to Benjamin Banneker or whoever the famous person is, in his case, Queen Haley, right? You don't want to take that big, gigantic jump back. You still need to take the steps. It's, it's like you don't want to try to hop over a ravine when you need to build a bridge to actually get to the other side. And I think that's great. And also bringing up free people of color, we can't make the assumption that everybody in our family was enslaved. 10% of the population of people that were of African descent who were living in the United States were free. And so with you have that proportion of folks, of course, you're going to find one, you know what I mean? Maybe two, maybe more, depending on where your family's from, who got together and decided to have children. There may be more, or just life circumstances. So we can't always just think that everybody that was from our ancestry is enslaved. And it's funny, the chat room people are like, that's Chris Haley. Because here's the thing that's funny. I didn't want the show to be about his uncle. It's about Chris. Like, Chris is a resource, right? I didn't say that on purpose. So of course, maybe I need to say this. Chris Haley is, not just Chris Haley because he decided to take that name. Alex Haley is his uncle, as in the Alex Haley. And clearly everybody in the chat room is
five letters and 5 letters.
Clearly everybody's like, I didn't realize that was that Chris Haley. It is that Chris Haley.
5 letters. I mean, the other thing,
exactly.
if people have access, and I waited for me or Nika, if you have access to the University of Census records, which we at the Maryland State Archives, we have within our study from 70 through 1880 counties in Maryland. But I think that is inclusive of all of the states in the United States. And you could check that, whatever research you're doing, you could check that and use different parameters to try to qualify what you're looking for, which is to say you could be looking in 1840 not only for how many enslaved blacks were in, let's say, Fairfax County, Virginia, also look for how many free blacks were in Fairfax in 1840. And that will, I think, for my purposes, reinforce the fact that in many of the southern states, as well as the border, there were many, many free blacks around the time period when we have assumed that everybody is enslaved and you can't find them. And translate.
Okay. True. I was going to say, Chris, if you can hit that chat button, it's on the top left-hand corner of your screen where it's a little blue chat. It's True. We got some messages up there. True's going to help you to see if we can fix your bandwidth issue because you're breaking up quite a bit. But I think, let me try to reiterate what you were saying.
First date.
I know.
I know, it's okay. It's okay.
It's fine.
We'll get it together. Did you find the chat?
I should have. I think somebody's taken over my computer. No, let me see. Computer.
No. She's gonna. If you found it, if you found,
I see something that's saying settings.
Yes, and she's trying to help you get to that. There's a little adjust bandwidth usage. Yes. Adjust bandwidth usage and move off of HD and just move it down and just see what you could do with that.
My friend Chadwick said this would be so easy.
Well, apparently he lied.
He lied. He got the big bucks now.
Oh my god. So here's let's continue. What are other common misconceptions? We talked about for the rest of the panel, right? We talked about people assuming everyone was a slave. We talked about the fact that people make a jump, right? They go from them automatically to an enslaved person. What are some of the other common misconceptions? I mean, this is just across the board about enslaved people that you all have come across, you've heard.
Literacy is a big one. Depending where people are, there's no reason for them to be illiterate. you can't assume that either, that they weren't able to take care of certain businesses. So they actually have record sets that you may not think of, because somebody might think they really didn't have the skill set. And drawing together all the facts and then working from the unknown to the known, from the known toward the unknown, I guess, is kind of basically what you're constantly doing, you know, with all the pieces that come together.
James?
Well, you know, I think one of the big issues or misconceptions also that comes up, and I figured this out one time when I was reading this little book here that I have here in front of me. That a lot of people think, especially when they're new to tracing formerly enslaved ancestors, they think that if they can't get back to back to the Gambia, right, that they failed. Mm-hmm. And that's something I think that a lot of people, and even people who kind of are, I guess, detractors of doing genealogy, they're like, oh, Alex Haley, he made that up, or oh, you can't do that, or whatever. Well, even if you don't get back to a slave ship or back to a country of origin or what have you, that doesn't mean that you failed. There are still valuable stories in between you and your first ancestors that came to America. And I've met a lot of people who they get discouraged because their story isn't as prolific in their minds as maybe the Haley family or Nika Smith's or whatever. No, your family story is important, but it's also going to be just as unique as your fingerprint. It's up to you to pull the value out of it and share it with the world. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Linda and True?
I was going to say, assuming that the white person next door was the slave owner. And all of us didn't take the slave owner's name. And now in my case, my family did on one line in particular, but you can't always make that assumption.
You have anything to add, True? You're
muted.
You're muted. In that
now you know it's bad when the operator's button is.
We've been doing that all night. It's all right.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I would have to agree with.
She's too busy trying to help me.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll get there. Yeah, what everyone said on the panel, and like Linda was saying, to jump on again, what she was saying about the slave owner's name. You know, I know that a lot of people, that is the first thing that comes up to mind, but it really is not true. I mean, I can tell you with the Ivories, we started out with Ivy, but you know, they could have changed your name when the 1870 census came along. It's so many reasons and misconceptions about enslaved people. So that's what we're here to talk about.
Absolutely. I would say for me, it's definitely, you know, that's why I hate those tropes. Whenever I teach on slavery, I always go, please stop the nearest white person on the census. No, the same one with the same last name. Don't do that either. You know, like, because in my experience, you know, I always talk about this. My enslaved ancestors were at the great-great-grandparent level, and I haven't found a single one, actually one, that has taken the same last name as their slaveholder. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, and that's the other thing. We also think patriarchal in a sense. We're doing genealogy, and you can't assume that an enslaved person, you know, that they took the same enslaved last name as their father when slaves took the disposition of their mother. So a man may have taken his mother's slaveholder's last name at some point, right? So we can't be short-sighted and think that, you know, that it's a catch-all, you know what I mean? And bringing up that point about 1870, I think that's very, 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 very important. So what steps, second question, what steps does a researcher need to take when they begin researching their enslaved ancestors? Don't all jump in. Chris, we'll try and see if your bandwidth is okay.
Start off on that right foot.
I gotta get that timeline down.
Yeah. Chris, where do you
put it? I thought it was all the way up to the end, so I don't know if that's not good enough. Still not working. I'd say that outside of, well, the things that we've mentioned already are very important. Uh, so I think part of it is that we should also that that there were laws in place to keep Black people from fighting in all of the wars. That's one thing. So one should think in terms of perhaps looking through military records. We just today had a meeting at the archives with about trying to explore more about African American patriots who fought and during the Revolutionary War. This time in the late century before the laws, or let's say Black law, could not specifically fight for the Union in the middle when they could actually even vote before, I think it's 1791 or 1793. So you actually could vote. Is to see this name in a muster roll or to see in a 1783 census where it might say COL for colored, or in some way indicate that this was color. But you also cannot or should not assume that throughout the beginning of time, laws were always in place that affected every single person of color. Because the beginning, certainly in Maryland, featured indentured servants. And indentured servants, while not treated great, were enslaved. And those could have been Black, Indian, or white. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And as I can't remember your name with the curly hair. I want to point, but what does that mean? But
Linda.
did
Linda.
not
Linda.
have a
Linda.
law
Yeah.
where Blacks could specifically read, and it was certainly it wasn't Summers want us to do, but it was not an act. Others.
Okay, we're gonna True work with him in the chat room to see if we can get it. So I'll sort of re-encapsulate. I feel like I'm miming. I'm reading.
Marcel Marceau.
No one told me he was this funny, so
No.
I was not prepared for this. But this is great.
I'm funnier with
he's funnier when he's when he's live. So basically what he just said was you can't assume that when you're looking through indentured servitude records that everybody is white, right? That's something that we should consider in terms of when you begin research.
Right.
And when you're looking at things. Something else to consider as well is the fact that he brought up earlier looking at census records and border locations. He talked about also looking at the proportion of free to enslaved people in state census records or in federal census records. He also talked about, someone remind me if I'm missing anything that he captured that's on the panel, because I saw Ellen taking copious notes.
All the different sets of military records.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
I can already hear Shelley Murphy talking about, yes, Revolutionary War patriots. This is a big deal, right? For me, some of my major breakthroughs in terms of tracing an enslaved ancestor have come through Civil War pension files, and the fact that there was discussion in those files about, who a owner was, where the person lived, did they abscond from that owner and enlist into the military? There are huge clues there. And we also just can't limit it to the Civil War. We have to think of other conflicts that African American people or people of color have been involved in, and look at those records to see if they mention the names of people who were formerly enslaved. And you're absolutely right with that. And anybody else in terms of, this is a great time in the show where we should definitely talk about, as we mentioned earlier, starting with yourself, tracing backwards, not taking this huge ravines leap into your research. And the other thing too that I think is important when you begin looking at your enslaved ancestors, most folks want to, they want to get to the 1870 census because that's the first one where, in theory, and I use the word in theory because we always say that's when all Black people, well, there were people who were left off the 1870 census. So we can't say that everybody was enumerated on there. But in theory, all African Americans or people who are of African descent living in the United States, were on that census as free people. You want to trace back to that census because it sort of gives you an idea of where to look for them in the years prior. We can't be short-sighted and say, okay, go from 1870 to slavery. No, there were 5 years in between that time period where people were establishing themselves as free people. They were registering to vote. They were getting married. They were buying and purchasing things. They left a footprint in those local environments. And as well as, records such as with the Freedmen's Bureau, right, where they may have had labor contracts. Their marriages may have gotten solemnized. Maybe they were working for somebody who said that they would establish a contract. They did, and they did not pay them correctly, and they had to report that to the person at the office. There are a number of records that you can use during that time period that will actually, in a lot of ways, help you trace the former slaveholder if you bother to go from 1865 to 1870. So I would definitely suggest not overlooking that time period. And for a lot of folks, I think they do because a lot of that stuff is not available online. It is, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say another record in between that time period is the when they had to pay taxes on themselves. So that's another one that'll help fill in that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or if they had a horse, whatever it was,
they had to pay taxes.
Yeah, they had to pay taxes on that stuff. So that's also a great resource. Anything else you guys can think of in terms of what steps a person needs to take when they begin researching enslaved ancestors?
I mean, looking at local laws or looking at the sets of laws that are given a given location can also help fill in what some families are dealing with, or what are the constraints that are being put on the population as well.
I think also I'm always very big on social context. To give you an example, in my family, like many other people, I was told when I was a little boy that I had some Native American in me somewhere over the rainbow. And then the more I looked on my mother's side in particular, I found that my mother's ancestors were enslaved mostly by people who were the ones pushing Native Americans out of the Southeast. So that kind of gave me a clue as to not only, I didn't have any Native American in me, but also it told me, okay, these are particular years or time periods when my family was entering into Georgia and Alabama. And lo and behold, when I started researching the history of one of the towns where my mom's family comes from, I found in a newspaper where they talk about some of my direct ancestors being some of the first Blacks brought into that area of Alabama, because they were enslaved by the founder of one of the towns. So it's understanding the social context and understanding, hey, they showed up there for a particular reason, because this person got some land, because he had fought and pushed Native Americans up out of the Southeast, but I wouldn't have known that had I not learned the social context. And as one of the loves of my life, you all are loves of my life, Miss Bernice Alexandra Bennett would say, there's no genealogy without history. Without history, there's no genealogy. So you definitely have to familiarize yourself with social context.
I was also going to add to, looking at the boundaries. Did the lines change in the location? Also, Shelley had to instill this in me because I was doing research without creating a timeline. You got to create that timeline so you can see where the gaps are. So that's another one.
All right. Anything else before we move on to common pitfalls?
I just want to say that a lot of what we're talking about applies for other places as well, like doing research in the Caribbean. I mean, we're talking slightly different. Some record sets are different, but we're really talking about larger categories. And connections too, as people do more of their DNA, they're going to start to they may find connections to Puerto Rico, for instance, where I have found instances of people from the South being sold there, and they become part of the population as well. There's just a lot to think about, but there's a lot of connections too.
All right. So, what do you all think are common pitfalls that people, we've actually talked about them a little bit tonight. We talked about the searching for, the whoever the nearest white person is in 1870. We talked about, white person in the same county or parish or location with the same last name. What are some other common pitfalls? My number one pet peeve is someone using the slave schedules as primary source documentation of somebody being owned. It's just like I cannot. If you want to drive me crazy, pull out a slave schedules and say that is your ancestor. If you want to, if you literally want to make me give you the Atlas gas face, do that. And for a blank line. And to me, it infuriates me because I think about, and we definitely at some point need to take a just like show the history of Maryland website where, 300,000 names, it's probably more than that, where you've got manumissions, all sorts of documents. And to me, it's like you totally devalue all that work that was done with that when you just use the slave schedules and a blank name, when you actually have names right there. You know what I mean? And that's just the state of Maryland website. So what are some other common pitfalls you all feel that people have with this type of research?
I think I'm gonna. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna rephrase.
Go ahead, James.
The battle of the red shirts. So I was gonna say I'm gonna say kind of what you said, Nika, but phrased a little differently. Is that don't define your ancestors just as being a slave. And I had to stress this to somebody I worked with very recently, because this person, long story short, came to me and said, hey, I'm researching an ancestor of mine who was formerly enslaved. I know that he was related to his white slave owning family up in Massachusetts. And he showed me where these guys had a fight back in 30 years prior to a death. And then when this white person had died, they left this person some land and whatnot and some records that we found. And so he says, well, why would he do that for a guy who was his slave? Or, even though he's free now, well, this was his former slave and they had a fight 30 years ago. And I said, well, according to what you told me, this was also his nephew and it was his last living blood relative that he had. So even though he was a former slave or what have you, he's still a part of this family. That he's still a father. He's still at this point a productive citizen. They had a fight 30 years ago, and yes, there was a slave owner relationship. But if you just define him as being a slave and that's it, you are missing out on the rest of his story. Because again, as the person that I worked with was telling me, you already told me this person became a free man at a certain point in time. Okay, so that would be my biggest thing. Don't just take that word slave and stamp it on somebody and say, okay, this person was a slave, so that means that his or her experience was the same as everybody else who ever was enslaved. No, that's not true. It's just simply not true.
I would also say doing all of your research on the computer. And then another pet peeve is copying from somebody else's tree online and assuming that's your ancestor.
Or not vetting that particular research.
Mhm.
Right.
You speaking of Anne Arundel County, for some reason, me and my dad's first cousin match all these Gaithers. And Gaithersburg is a place in Maryland, right? So
Right.
someone had this person on their tree and they had this beautiful, beautiful extract of a free papers. And so I was looking like, okay, well, where'd they get this from? So I messaged the person and she says, oh, I don't know. And I said,
Wow.
okay. So then I was like, you know what? I'm going to track it down. So I spent my time, went to the state of Maryland archive, went to the whole record set that Chris is the director over, and I found it. And when I added it to the record that I had, I made sure Maryland State Archives, this collection, blah, 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 blah. We have to be very diligent about that stuff because folks are so eager. And this is another pitfall. People are so eager to find these names and to have this connection that they will sometimes just choose anybody. And sort of shoehorn themselves and their family history into this person, not really vetting that it's the right person or using, what I mean, sort of common sense tactics or things where, sometimes you need to have a second person or a third person come in and say, hey, this doesn't look right. Like these birth dates are like 30 years off, or something like that. We definitely do need that. Anything else in terms of pitfalls before we get into crucial record sets, because we're probably going to spend the majority of our time on that tonight.
I just want to say, I remember you teaching us, Nika, to have a honeymoon with it. Have a honeymoon with that document. I remember that from the last webinar that you gave us. So,
Yeah, and what she means is I taught a webinar and I said, get your documents, go on a honeymoon. Like that's Bay. You guys are laid up on the hammock together. You got your drink, you got your iPad, you got your dictionary, you got whatever. You just over there just getting to know your documents inside and out, so that if somebody like me comes around and I start asking questions like, what about this? What about that? You're clear. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anything else anybody want to weigh in before we start talking about crucial record sets? Because that's going to be the longest time.
So you're thinking that record sets might be destroyed, and or that there isn't any more to find, and there's always a workaround. There's going to be another institutional record set. You could probably go to some other. There's always another path around.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ellen. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I agree with especially, and what Nika, is that so many times people will come to the circulation desk and they'll do their research and they'll get frustrated. I mean, black and white will get frustrated, and they'll be terms like, well, they must have been born, or I know they were married. And I'm like, well, yeah, but if you find it, one thing I try to tell people, and maybe it's man, but I say, but right where you looked, where you didn't find something,
right,
where you looked for whoever you looked, find something, so you don't have to do that again. That in that sense, I feel like it's not a beautiful, positive thing, but it is save yourself so that you can enjoy your with your records. Because I don't need to look for a O in records. 70 census again. This is all of his spellings, and I didn't find him. A way to try to confirm Uncle Joe in 1870. In a week or two, somebody was helping me and I couldn't find him, but I know he's there, so I want to look again. Like,
yeah,
wow.
You're absolutely right.
Well,
Just to reiterate everything he said, it was pretty clear. But basically, he said, don't feel like it's the end of the world when you don't find it. That actually is a good thing, because you can check it off on your list and say, hey, I've looked at that. I've looked at all the records. I've tried this name, that name, the third. So now I can check that off my list. And I think sometimes it's the very immediate nature of online research has made us forget about appreciating the process, because we get this instant gratification, right? You type in a name, boom, it's there. Okay, great. You know what I mean? And people, they get frustrated, when stuff doesn't pop up immediately, and then when you transfer that whole reaction and expectation to the on-site environment, people can get literally like when he was describing that whole just exchange across the circulation desk, like I saw the entire thing, because I've seen people at the archives doing that. They come, they got their iPad, it's loaded. I got my family tree. I'm gonna zoom, and I've got it. And they spend 1 hour there, and they get burnt out, and they come to the circulation desk like, y'all lied and told me I was gonna find it. And it's like, no, we told you we had stuff. Now, whether or not your name is hey, come on now. Let's keep it real. Because sometimes, here's the thing. You might have thought the people were in Maryland, but they were in D.C. or they were in Virginia. You have to go to that archive, and so you can check that list off and say, I looked there. I've exhausted this. We're you know what I mean? It's done. I've got to move on. I've got to do other things. Linda, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, assuming your ancestor died because you can't find them in the record, they may have changed their name for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, you're
That's it.
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So, I think
And then there's
that.
passing.
Oh
Oh,
yes, there's that.
yes.
Oh my gosh, you are just giving all the life to the circulation desk tonight. I can't find them because they were passing. No, you can't find them because
They're
they're passing. That is so
Then
true.
you want to say, no, they weren't passing. They were white. They just weren't black. They were white.
That yeah.
Or no, they were black. They were black. That's what you're getting.
Oh my gosh. We need to have a reality show that's just like from the circulation desk at the Maryland State Archives, because it sounds like it just completely goes down there. In terms of resources, I'm not gonna belabor everything, but people forget that the United States Census prior to the 1850 and 1860 slave schedules actually did document slavery on it. People are very short-sighted about that because it's not a separate schedules. You have to be able, this is the important part of knowing what all of those columns on the census mean. And the fact that when you get into those earlier records, 1790, 1800, 1810, you'll see, the total number of enslaved for a particular owner. Of course, you're not getting names. My son is acting a fool right now. Please just know, everybody,
You're gonna
okay.
go Wakanda on them.
Yeah, no, like seriously, he only does this when we're doing this. So just know that he's fine. He just is mad because he doesn't want to go to sleep tonight. So please pray for Chandler. Please pray for Chandler tonight. He's bad.
Is he gonna get some old school smack?
Oh yeah, no, my husband just carried him to the back. And usually what he tries to do is he tries to run up here so he can make an appearance, but he didn't quite get that far tonight. Dad,
No.
stop that. So here's the thing. So you've got certain census records where it's just the number of people, right? So it's almost is useless in air quotes as the slave schedules is, but it's still very important because if you're trying to track a family, in terms of them owning slaves, how many, they owned in this year versus that year, that can change. That could potentially change. So that's a good resource. But, you want primary. What we're talking about is where the slaves are named, which they are. And let's talk about a misconception here. There's this whole idea that slaves were never named in documents. Oh, it's so rare to find a slave's name. No. Don't perpetuate that myth. Please, 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 please do not. Do not. Okay. We're talking about deed records, right? If you're in Louisiana, the term conveyance is used. If you're somewhere else, it may be indentures, right? Or agreements between two parties where slaves were sold from one person to the other, right? Mortgages. For me, I have an enslaved group of people, 250 plus people that I've found documented 19 times from 1810 to 1855. And the majority of that documentation were mortgages that were taken out against them, yes, against people, in order to finance operations, a new plantation, maybe cash or whatever it is. They would have to list out the names of those slaves because the slaves and the land that they were working were considered collateral for whatever that loan was. So those are other things. What are some death-related documents that you would trace enslaved people? Because this is an easy catch-all if you've ever done this sort of research. But we have to remember, some folks may be new to this. So what are death-related documents that you can use to trace slavery?
Wills.
Say that again.
Wills.
Yes, a will.
Yeah, wills and tariff documents.
We know where a slaveholder would say, for my general love and affection for Ellen Fernandez Sacco, I'm going to leave my slave James. I mean, that's, or I bequeath James to Linda Buck Sims because I love her hair tonight. It could be a number of different things. But that's basically, that's that. What else? What other death-related documents would you find?
Can I be bequeathed to Beyonce? I just.
She asked me earlier.
She don't want you.
No.
She don't want you. She don't
Thought of
want
that.
you.
To
What other
the left,
to the left, to the left. That's what she said.
maybe. But
What other death
You got
related? We're talking, right? Number one you
except
can
in the
think of
elevator.
is estate inventories, right? So somebody's estate probates, or they have to get the value of what is being given, potentially given away to other people. They will list the
right.
enslaved people with a value. A lot of times it'll be done within family groups, so mother, father, children, but that's not always the case. You can't assume that every grouping is a mother and a father. It could be a grandparent, it could be a cousin, it could be a number of things. So you still have to vet those groupings within an inventory. And Chancery court probate records, those are also things. Personal and business papers, these are huge. If you have a archives or a library that has the personal papers of a particular family, don't think that because your family, the potential slaveholding family, didn't have 7,000 slaves, that their papers aren't left anywhere. That's not true. Do a Google search, look at WorldCat, right? Search for the surname and the location, and see if a enslaved or family that owns slaves has their papers anywhere. That's a great resource. Court cases, I always say this: somebody was gonna fight over them slaves. It's almost inevitable. Somebody's gonna get mad because grandpa didn't leave them to them, or maybe the new wife got them and she sold them off to another state. Now those are supposed to be mine, and you're gonna find court cases. One of the easiest ways to find these is on Google Books. I love it because it's typed out and they tell you what the decision is. And if somebody appealed, it went all the way to the state, or sometimes it went to the Supreme Court. I've seen that happen, and sometimes they will list the names of the slaves and they'll give you the whole thing. I had one slaveholder, Lord, poor woman, she had died. She had been dead. She had been dead about maybe 30 years, and the folks were still arguing over the slaves, and they put all her business out on the street, and we're talking about how her two oldest children were illegitimate. This was in a court decision.
So
Go ahead, Ellen.
Nika, with that case, then did you find like newspaper coverage as well to accompany that too? Because that would be not so much.
Sometimes, and newspapers are also, that's a great resource to bring in as well, because if somebody's estate was probating, they would have to make an announcement: hey, so and so died, we're going to sell off the plantation, or we're going to sell these slaves, or back taxes, right? Somebody owes taxes, or they default on the mortgage. We're going to sell whatever this is on the courthouse steps on this day at this time. They have to put a notice out in the paper. So that's a great way to segue into that. And you're right, with some of the court cases, you can find documentation of it in newspapers.
I was going to say newspapers, as well as mortality schedules as well. That's another one.
Right.
Now, she brings up an important point. Linda, talk about the mortality schedules, because some people don't realize what you're talking about.
So the mortality schedules, or another document where you see the people listed by name, and is actually after slavery. Mississippi have mortality schedules, and I've been able to find ancestors on there as well. And a good way to look and to notice that is when you do your timeline with children. Is there a big gap? Is someone missing? That's when I go look over there at the mortality schedule.
Something else that I think people should also look out for, and it's not as widely known as I think it should be, are the fact that former slaves actually did organize themselves into benevolent societies. Probably the most famous one being the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. So definitely take a look at that and research it. I believe the National Archives actually has some of their documentation, but that organization actually was able to get a lot of people to formally join. And I don't know that there's been as thorough a study of the history of that movement that took place in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, when a lot of the formerly enslaved were getting older and whatnot, and they were actually saying, hey, we deserve pensions. So I think that's something that you should also take a look at as well.
Yeah, to chime in, to go back to Linda's point, Angela's in the chat room, and she mentions that there are over 43,000 slaves in the mortality schedules. And I think that is a very underutilized record set that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to. Chris mentioned chattel records, which are sales of private property. People might well be named in them. That's absolutely right. We talked about Civil War pensions or military related. We talked about the Freedmen's Bureau, which is not just labor contracts. Matter of fact, that's a shout out for the next show we're doing. We're having a whole show about the Freedmen's Bureau next Tuesday. So if you're interested in that, come on back next Tuesday and check that out. Emancipation records, Free People of Color registries, Book of Negroes or Black Loyalists, lists that were put together to document free people of color, state census, county taxes are key, insurance policies, right? You've got sacramental records like the Catholic records that exist for Louisiana or even other places that were under a Catholic system where they've got marriages, baptisms, deaths, all those things would have the names of slaves in them. Gotta shout out the 5 civilized tribes. DAWs, cards, and applications. They just say who the slave owner is. Just look the person up, boop, right there. Ship manifest. Oh my gosh, I just got into these like super just I'm in like Mississippi and Louisiana territory right now, which is totally broadening my research horizons. But the reason why I bring that up is after the importation of slaves was banned, people had to document when they were moving slaves from one place to another. And so there's a huge database of ship manifests going into New Orleans and other locations that you can search for potential slaveholders' name or a slave's name as well. Another database, if you're looking at Louisiana, Afro-Louisiana History and Genealogy, 1719 to 1820, the Gwendolyn Midlow Hall database, it's referred to as Louisiana Slave Records, same years on Ancestry. Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, slavevoyages.org, that's another one. Anybody else want to throw in anything while we're talking about it? We've got about 4 minutes left.
Oh, I just say Family Search has a ton of probate records for Alabama that I think are probably underutilized also.
Yes. Yeah. Can we talk about that? So here's game recognized game for the night. I'm about to blow you all's mind because I bet you everybody is watching this is really not paying attention. Y'all know we give you the good every single week. So so this is what we're gonna do. All right. So you know what? Normally when you're looking at your family search, right? Everybody goes to the website and they just go to the main page, right? You're like, hey, I'm here. What? This is great. This is awesome. And then you go to search records, right? Because you don't want to deal with anything that is not indexed because I mean, gosh, why would I waste my time, right? But here is where the good stuff is. Go to search, go to catalog. Okay. You're like, why are we here? Let's just put in Louisiana, Orleans, right? Since it's Mardi Gras, let's do that. And you're like, why would I do it? You're searching the actual card catalog that Family Search has. This is the microfilm they use to circulate. These are the books that they have available at the main library in Salt Lake City. So we're going to search what they have. Okay, here's this long list. Oh, this is great. All right, this is wonderful. Actually, James, let me put in yours because I know, actually, I'll do Mississippi. Excuse me for my lapse of judgment here. Should have did this first. Okay. So let's just say you put in Adams County, which is Natchez, right? Mm-hmm. If you come over here and click, you can come and look at deed records. We talked about deed records. Okay. If you notice right here, and I'm going to blow this up so you guys can't tell me you couldn't see it. Okay. If you look here to the right, there's a little icon right here. You see there's a camera here, and then there's a little microfilm reel here, right? Anything that has this camera is available for you to view at home. At home, as in the chair you're sitting in, you could be in your pajamas and your robe at 3 a.m, okay? If it has a little key at the top of it, that means that you have to be at a family history center to view it. If it still has this little spool, that means that it's available at the big Family Search library, but it has not been digitized yet. The reason why I bring this up is look at these dates. These are conveyances. It says land, but these are also deeds. That means that slaves are in these records. Mm-hmm. And this is available for free 99. Free. FREE 99. Okay.
Free 99.
Yes, free 99. Okay, look
I
at all these
want
records. So if
two
you are
of
somebody
those.
who is hey, if you are somebody who is looking, right, for probate records, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, uh uh I'm trying to think, Georgia. So many of these are already digitized, meaning that this can keep you from having to go to Salt Lake or having to go on site and go and look at some of these records. Or you still may want to do that, but you can do pre-work before you even get there. I'm just, hey, I'm just trying to help y'all, because if folks, how do you think I mentioned these 19 documents, right? How do you think I got 19 different documentation pieces for an enslaved group of people? I was sitting in this chair looking at this computer, and I was on Family Search.
They don't hear.
Tennessee is
They don't
on
hear
there
you.
as well. Camera with the key, you have to go to a family history center, and it has to be one within a Mormon church. It can't just be a family history center, because some of them are libraries and they don't have access, like a family history center within a a Mormon church. So be on the look for that. But if it has that camera, you better click that camera. You better use that index and go to that deed book and search like you're searching on site. Am I lying? James, does it go down in the catalog?
Look, I'm telling you, they don't hear you. They don't hear you in the back, preacher.
Yes. Sterling said, wow, I know what I'm doing tonight. I'm going to blame. Hey, if you break through a brick wall tonight, I want you to tweet BlackProGen, because I know it's going down.
Right.
See,
Nika, I
Chris
want to
Henry
add.
didn't know he was coming to church tonight.
Yeah.
I did. I'm sweating like a. Well, you know the rest.
Linda, what were you going to add?
I was going to say, with Family Search, you have to be willing to look, because not all of the records are indexed. So sometimes, especially the educable children records, you got to be willing to go through those
You
and
can't
not get
depend on the
impatient.
index.
Right.
Yeah, don't get
Right.
impatient, and don't depend on the index. Anything else we want to wrap up in before we get to viewer comments? And Chris, you feel free if you want to stay around, because we're going to go into the section of the show where we answer a viewer query and work out their research question live. So you don't feel like you have to stay for that part. You can bow out if you want to, or you can sit and cackle with us, because we have a few other things we have to do.
I've done so well with true worker for Ann Sullivan, and I'm trying, but she's like, I guess
He's doing fine.
I didn't.
Yes. Oh, I just saw your note. 1832 Census for Colonization Society. Many of these blacks were free. They were being targeted to voluntarily sail back to Africa. That's a great, yeah. So 1832 Census for Colonization Society. That's a great record set to look at. Yeah, okay. Everybody, there's people in the chat room saying, I'm gonna be, yeah, I want, and don't claim your victory without telling BlackProGen, because we gamed you up tonight. Because here's the thing, you guys, seriously, you guys don't understand how many millions of enslaved people are hiding in these records. And folks they go to the reference desk and they have a meltdown. And you just have to just go that extra mile, follow that lead, go on that honeymoon, like for real, go on that honeymoon. And I'm serious. And if you are in these states where the records are digitized already, or you have access to a family history center where you can get to them, I'm telling you guys, like, I just believe that you just don't even understand. Like, how would I stumble? I stumbled on so much stuff just because I was curious when I was like, well, let me see what they digitized. Because here's the thing, they're not posting a list that says, this week we did these films. That is not happening. So you have to go back and just periodically look to see what they're digitizing first are the films that are most used. And then they're getting around to everything else. They're not circulating film anymore. So you've got to wait for your good stuff to come out. And I'm telling you, Lord, I just can't even put it into words. All right, y'all go ahead, say what you got to say to end so we can get the comments and ask Mariah. Anything else you guys got before we close out? Words of wisdom.
I just posted one. I forgot to say, search the whole community and not just the page your ancestors on, because you might miss somebody.
True. And the other thing I would also add as well is don't just search for the person you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Don't
Yes.
say, I want Billy Bob Beyonce, because that's my third great grandfather. And you can't find Billy Bob Beyonce
Right.
and you just give up. No. For me, in my experience, and it seems like this is the way for everybody else, you went to the uncle of Billy Bob or you went to his brother and they had just enough of a clue and a record that they had that then led you back to whoever, and you're, oh my gosh, now I'm at a slaveholder. I would have never thought to do this because you were focused on Billy Bob Beyonce. Move beyond him. Look at the
Right.
entire circle of family members. And that includes looking at these records like Civil
Right.
War pension files, stuff like that. The clue could be hiding with a relative, but because we're so short-sighted and we're at the reference desk complaining because we don't want to look between,
Right.
we don't want to move in this direction, we're not finding these things. So so please look beyond Billy Bob. Please do it for me.
I just want to say it's a good thing to periodically review some of the stuff that you already have, because you may find that details will
Yes.
jump out, or you have knowledge that you can already add to that,
Yeah, I would say use oral history as a guide. Don't necessarily be married to it, but use it as a guide. If in your family
Right.
they told you for years that you had a couple of African words that came over on a slave ship with you, hey, investigate it. You never know what you'll find.
There's no absolutes in tracing slavery.
A lot of variables,
Mhm.
a lot of variables. And it's going to take a long time. It can take 4 times the time to do this research. But if you know that going into it, that's okay. You'll just keep at it.
And I would say sometimes for some people it's quick. For some people, for me, it took me 18 years on one line. The rest of them, because I got that one and I stopped looking like a horse during the Zulu parade,
And blinders.
right? With the blinders on, I stopped being the horse's Zulu and I took those
Right.
things off and I started looking around and I was like, well, wait a minute. And it literally blew the lid off of everything else because I stopped being short-sighted and stopped saying I have to find this particular person. I started working around. So we're here to support you. Tweet us, hashtag us, ask questions. We want to know. We want to see the fruit coming off the tree from tonight, because I can guarantee you that is coming out. And James, do you have some fruit, James? You're reporting fruit?
I literally just went in the catalog, and earlier before the show, when we were doing our usual antics, I asked True to look up a relative for me, and she said, "Oh, you never told me her maiden name. You just told me the married name." I said, "Yeah, well, her maiden name was Curry." So I'm on Family Search now, and I'm finding, and I see this record here, and what does this say? It says the Curry family, Alabama mulattoes, 1840. And there's a whole book and all this type of stuff. That's interesting. I think I need to look into this.
You sure do. Car catalog, gang recognized game.
Well, in bright red letters here, it says to view a digital version of this item, click here.
Oh,
see that camera.
Y'all cannot. I'm telling y'all.
I'm about
$3.99 is the best price, dude.
I'm about to log off tonight. Y'all done messed me up.
This is when you have to write down. I was on the last page I was on was 53, so you know
Me
where
too.
you left
Me
off
too.
at.
I have a whole notepad full
I
of
know,
where I
that thing
left
is
off on the
pitifully
digital file.
Yeah,
Shoot,
mine's is pitiful.
Shoot! I gotta think how much I like BlackProGen and our fans right now. Y'all done messed me up. Well, Karen Galloway is there, so since Karen Galloway is one tonight, I guess I'll stay.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me get to viewer comments before we jump into Ask Mariah. Karen Galloway, who you just have referred to, said the common misconception is that everyone was on a plantation picking cotton, cutting cane, planting rice, indigo. They lived in cities and with families and had other occupations. Yes, absolutely. Shelley Murphy says, don't stop at the Civil War time. Keep going. Shanna Christmas said, I just saw someone in a Facebook group about enslaved ancestors listing all these surnames and locations associated with free people of color. They don't realize that they were free people of color. All right. So here we go. Here is your time. And now's the time for your favorite part of BlackProGen Live, Ask Mariah. This is the part of the show where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more to the panel, and we weigh in live with research help specifically geared toward you. Just a reminder, panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genia buds get past their brick walls. So here we go with tonight's episode's Ask Mariah, which is from Reese. And
Is
Reese, if you're in
Mariah, does that mean we need to get her some tea?
yes, Mariah likes tea and she gives the tea. She does both. Um,
Okay.
she does both.
Make sure.
Yeah. So Reese is looking for any information. If you are in the chat room, let us know so that we know we're not just shooting, stuff into the dark. So Reese is looking for any information on fourth great grandfather William Menzies. If you can give me any information on who his parents were, how and why he inherited his slave plantation and got his freedom. This could shed more light on the rich history of my family and giving more insight also on the ethnic diversity of my family. All right, so moving forward, when William Menzies was listed as a free person of color in his 1817 slave register and as a free black man in his 1818 baptism record. He owned or partly owned a plantation called Brunswick in St. Anne's, Jamaica. I was able to find him on what appears to be him, and possibly his siblings in an 1820 slave register, being listed as age 42 Sambo and stating that he had been manumitted. So we've got an 1870 slave register, a 1818 baptism record for a free black man, a notation of potentially owning or partially owning a plantation called Brunswick in St. Anne's. I was able to find him what appears to be him, possibly his siblings in an 1820 slave register, being listed as age 42 Sambo and stating that he'd been manumitted. All right, next slide. So in terms of total records, we've got 1817 slave register for William Menzies, 1818 baptism record, 1820 slave register listing William Menzies as manumitted slave to Eliza Murphy, 1833 baptism record of William's children, 1871 baptism record of William's grandson, Alfred Menzies. No one has done this research. I have taken a DNA test. They've taken Ancestry and 23andMe. All right. Let's ask Mariah. What do you all think?
My first question is, I wonder how much research he's done onto this Eliza Murphy.
Yeah, I had a question about that as well. There was a little bit of a discrepancy to me. It seemed like with this 1820 slave register, and then it was sort of there was an 1820 slave register, and then there was a 1818 baptism record that said he was free. So I am wondering if he's vetted, that one of these is not, and it sort of seemed like that he hadn't vetted that the 1820 was him. He was more sort of holding on to to the 1818 was correct. And I think researching Eliza Murphy is a good idea. We've dealt with St. Anne's before. Didn't we find a really awesome website for slavery in Jamaica on a few episodes ago? Because I remember St. Anne's in Jamaica be coming up for something.
I don't remember that one.
I want to say it wasn't this year. It was like towards the end of last year. I want to say it may have been like before the Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribes episode. It was like October. It was somewhere in there where we found this awesome website where it literally had the plantations with the location, records. It was from a university in Britain, if I recall correctly.
But you know what, no, Nika, that brings up a good point though, because since we are talking about Jamaica, I wonder, and I'm not an expert in Jamaica or Caribbean history or what have you, but I do wonder what type, and maybe that could be an episode, what type of records are there in the Caribbean that, or for the Caribbean that may be physically located at some British university or something like that. That is something that's an issue I don't think we have to deal with as much in American genealogy, but for the Caribbean, I imagine that there would probably be a lot of stuff back in Liverpool and London and places like that.
Yeah, I think because we typically don't deal with Caribbean records, so we have to take what he says at face value. And here's the thing: I always tell folks, sometimes you just got to go there. and you don't know what you find until you actually get there. The other thing is, this brings about an important point about recognizing and realizing what's available, beforehand, right? So if, what's the history of St. Anne's? Since we've got this potential record with Eliza Murphy, right? What do we know about her? Since we're talking about enslaved people on this episode, the thing is, yes, you research your ancestors as free people, you research them. But when they're slaves, you have to research the slaveholding family just how you would research your own family. It's almost as they go hand in hand. They're married together, because where those slaveholders went, the slaves went as well. So you've got to know both of them just the same way. You've got to be able to rattle off facts and things about them in the same way. And sometimes that takes a long time for you to get that knowledge before you can actually, jump out and finding new things. Anybody else want to chime in? I know that Angela, there were a few people asking what the denomination was of the baptismal records. He didn't state what they were, but I would imagine.
Anglican.
I don't want to assume they were Catholic, but
Right.
Probably some Anglican, I imagine.
Yeah, the person has a lot, but then I guess, and you were saying that they have to confirm some things, because if in 1818 they're free, or they're listed as a free person, then I don't care about a slave record in 1820. So at some point you have to figure that out, because you don't need to go. You're confirming it, and then if later on it says at Sambo, then Sambo is a designation of heritage, which is to say the person is, I think, 3 parts black and 1 part white if it's in Spanish or Portuguese. So I think that I'd want to have clarity that person knows what Sambo means in that case. It's like there's mulatto,
like whether it's a caste
black,
designation,
white.
there's something
In
more.
America, yeah, but there it means more. It's really a more specific breakdown of what that person's, and then that could make them look into another relation who's white there. So I had a book, a book that really differentiated what different terms meant, if it's French, if it's Spanish, if it's Portuguese. And Sambo meant that you were of a certain mixture of black and white. So, and I wonder if this person knows that, or if they just thought Sambo because it was just
I think I've seen that with a Z.
A person of color.
Yeah, for the cast in the cast
Really?
opinion. Yeah, with it spelled with a Z though. Yeah, and then it's also used as just British naming patterns as well.
Right.
I
Like
found the
Caesar
website again.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and because I was like, there's got to be a way that I can find this, because I remember this website. When you all see it, you're probably gonna remember this. Remember this? It was this university,
right? The legacies.
Yeah, the university of some. I don't know where this school is, but they have this British slave ownership database.
It's tied to the David Olagosa series on slavery in London. Slavery in England.
Yeah, and I remember looking at this, but I would just look at Murphy's, and if they're in St. Anne, if there are other places, just take a look and see who's here. The other thing about this too is that, record systems are not the same, versus what we're usually used to dealing with. And so that's where the benefit of going on site, a lot of these questions we cannot answer until the certain records are digitized, or until we actually go there and go and look in the records, or until you pay someone to actually research this stuff. But I think the process still is the same though. You're still going to research the enslaved family or the enslaving family, because then that will tell you where your ancestor was. At this point, you need to make the jump from researching the enslaved to researching the formerly enslaved. Karen Galloway brings up a great point. It talks about the claims that were paid out by the British government for slaves. That's on the National Archive site of Britain. You can find a database there. That stuff has been digitized or at least the online version of it has been up for a long time. They're well ahead of us. We'll just put that there. Anything else you guys can think of before we move into current events?
My question: person seems to know, and so if they were to come to the archive, basically say, well, what more do you want to know? I mean, I want more specificity about what more do you want to know at which point in this person's life, because
the question that
they
they
know
ask,
so much.
yeah.
I mean, it just leaves me at
Well, the question they ask is who are his parents and how and why he inherited his slave plantation and got his freedom. And I haven't seen anything based on what he
wow.
provided us that said that that they have
Right.
documentation of a deed that said that this was his plantation, right? I also haven't seen, if you want to get to the names of the parents, you've got to research the enslaving family, right? So that's how you
Right.
would get there. But researching that
Right.
land is probably going to lead you back to a potential owner. It's not always a guarantee, but
Is part of what we're dealing with an oral history, or is it? I mean, where that information came from is not really spoken to.
yeah, like a baptism record is not going to tell you that somebody
Right.
owns a slave plantation.
Right.
Baptism records for anybody is not going to say that. It's just going to establish family relationships. And since you do have baptisms for his children, right, and his grandchildren, look at the naming patterns. That's something that we as a community,
Right.
a diaspora, we did. We named our children after people who we descended from. And so some of those names may have been reused, and they may be a clue for you as to who to look up next or who to find connections to next. I'm kind of out of ideas at this point.
Read contextually.
I think it's true.
For the time period.
It's like, what did they already look at? Because my first thought was, well, if you want to know if they own land, then look in land records. And if you have already, because if you haven't looked at land records, then I'm like, well, then what are you asking? If you have looked at land records, then I understand, because I've already looked at land records and I can't find it there. So then what's my next step? But then if you haven't.
Yeah. No.
Well,
I mean, we didn't really provide you a lot of help, but I think we challenged you enough on some of the assertions and other things that were made. That's the thing. It's like, this is where it's like, okay, yes, oral history is great, but this is where we vet it. This is where, we say it's cutting the mustard or it's not,
right.
And definitely let us know, what you do encounter. Or if you, maybe if you don't find anything, or maybe if you have another brick wall, feel free to submit it. But if you do have a research brick wall and you'd like some help from BlackProGen scaling the wall, be sure to submit your query today for Ask Mariah. The link is in the description of each and every episode of BlackProGen Live. Remember to be specific. See, got to be specific, right? Tell us everything you've searched so we don't duplicate your efforts if you get selected. And cross your fingers when you press submit. You just may be chosen for one of our upcoming episodes. All right, talking about current events tonight from sfgate.com, Roger Fairfax Sr. had something he needed to show his son. It was Inauguration Day earlier this month, being, early 2018. And in just 20 minutes, Justin Fairfax would be sworn in as Virginia's lieutenant governor in a room in the state capitol steps where Robert E. Lee accepted command of the Confederate troops in 1861. Roger Fairfax handed his son a piece of paper. It was a copy of the manumission document of their ancestor, Simon Fairfax, born into slavery but emancipated by this handwritten deed on June 5th, 1798. Roger had seen it for the first time the day before. Now, in the happy swirl of people heading into the cold for the swearing-in ceremony, Justin Fairfax looked at the white photocopy and tried to hand it back to his dad for safekeeping. Justin, I want you to hold it, his father said. This will be a story your children and grandchildren will want to hear. How awesome is that? All right. Also, from the Washington Post, they consider themselves white, But DNA tests told a more complex story. As more Americans take advantage of genetic testing to pinpoint the makeup of their DNA, the technology is coming head to head with the country's deep rooted obsession with race and racial myths. This is perhaps no more true than for the growing number of self identified European Americans who learn they are actually part African. For those who are surprised by their genetic heritage, the new information can often set into motion a complicated recalibration of how they view their identity. While African Americans generally assume that they may carry non-African DNA dating back to the rape of African slaves by white slave traders and owners, many white Americans, like Pursley, who is here, her name is Nicole Pursley, grow up believing that their ancestry is fully European and believing belief manifested in things from kitschy 100% Irish T-shirts to more sinister racial purity affiliations. And yes, the one drop rule applies here. So, has anybody encountered someone who did not know that they were Black in their DNA results on the panel?
I haven't encountered anyone who didn't know that they had African ancestry, but I have encountered several people who were shocked to find out that they were related to people of African ancestry. I've had that encounter quite a bit, and it's always very interesting because, you know, to steal Shannon Christmas's line, you know, when they ask how could this happen, it's kind of like, well, you know, when a man and woman love each other, you know, it's like it goes into that, you know,
and the music starts playing.
Yeah, right.
Dude,
There was a
The lights
fiddler
go
over
down.
there.
right, you know. I mean, it's just I have had that happen, and
Yeah.
I think the first time it happened, it was like the person was very insulted because I knew what the connection was, and the person was like, well, my cousin said, are you insinuating that my great granddaddy had sex with a slave woman? I'm like, no, I'm insinuating that our great granddaddy, you know, slept with two different women, and one was black and one was white, and there you go. That's how we got the DNA connection.
No, notice the keyword "our." Well, I mean, that's the thing is DNA tests keep happening, and you know, as this story just continues to develop, right? I mean, Ancestry now is over 7 million people, so I would imagine that a lot of folks are potentially, you know, finding out this information, you know, for the first time, and they're shocked, you know, because they don't identify as anything other than white. But I mean, you know, I told the story earlier today. You know, I had two cousins that are over 100 centimorgans that, you know, check completely different racial designation boxes than I do, and of course they had questions like, wait a minute, what happened? You know, but that's the story of our country right now. And if anybody follows me on Facebook, I actually posted a picture recently of my family, me and my first cousins and my second cousins, and we all probably check different boxes. And these are first and second cousins. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for.
It's an age phenomenon. Or do you think that it goes by generation or no? Or
I think so. I think younger generations in particular, I think they're more willing to accept this. I think they're more able to process.
Right.
You know, and there may even be some of that, well, we just won't tell mom, you know, or we just won't tell dad, or we won't tell grandma type thing.
Right.
You know, but yeah, I think it's going to continue to happen. I mean, there's just, yeah, it just is at this point. But anywho, anybody else chiming in with anything before we move on, before we go ahead and close on out for the evening? All right, let's see. Okay, well, we've got a new look, new theme, and more shows to get you up to speed on all things people of color and genealogy and family history related. Visit whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule so you don't miss a thing. Its records go way beyond labor contracts, and it wasn't ever a bank. Discover the origins, history, and how to properly search for documents that make up one of the most important record sets created during the Reconstruction time period. The Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands. Tune in to the 52nd episode of BlackProGen Live entitled Deconstructing the Freedmen's Bureau, Tuesday, February 20th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube. Tune in live for Preparing Our Genealogical Blueprint for the Next Generation with Shara McCargo-Baugh on the latest episode of the long-running Research at the National Archives and Beyond, hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Bernice Bennett this Thursday, February 15th at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Also, check out the 426th episode of the African Roots podcast, due to be posted this Friday by its host and BlackProGen Live panelist, Angela Walton Raji. Are you heading to Roots Tech? Don't miss BlackProGen Live panelist sessions and a chance to meet your favorite YouTube Live crew in person. Shelly, Tony, True, Angela, Bernice, Tasia, Willie, and I will be in the house for all things tech and genealogy. Be sure to chat with us to get a BlackProGen Live ribbon for your badge, and stop by the Expo Hall, booth 133 for the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, just to see what we're up to. And here is just a little nudge. Here are some things that our panelists are totally super duper into right now, like big time into right now. If you have not started listening to the Uncivil podcast, Lord, I don't know what to tell you. Please catch up. Please catch up. Uncivil is a new history podcast from Gimlet Media, where we go back to the time our divisions turned into a war and bring you stories left out of the official history. You can get new episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. And I'm telling you, oh my gosh, it is so good. You get drawn in. Oh, this is my absolute favorite. Another new favorite of ours is the Loving Generation. In 1967, the Supreme Court decision, Loving versus Virginia, overturned all laws forbidding interracial marriage. The Loving Generation tells the story of how a generation of Americans born to one Black and one white parent experienced race and identity. Check out new episodes on Facebook, and they actually just posted a new one today. So be sure to check that out. And Shelley Murphy's favorite, Ben Franklin's World, which is a show for people who love history and for those who want to know more about the historical people and events that have impacted and shaped our present day world. Get new episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Get the Lowdown by BlackProGen. Subscribe to get the collective feed of our blog posts, radio shows, podcasts, BlackProGen Live episodes, and more. Look for the subscription link in the description of each and every episode of BlackProGen Live. We also want to remind you, don't forget to join the conversation, participate in the live chat that's going on YouTube. And don't forget, if you got to get something out of there, you better copy it, because it's going to go up in smoke when we end this broadcast. And that chat's taking place, top right-hand corner of the screen, bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, weigh in on Twitter. We are serious. We want you to tweet us or hashtag your tweets BlackProGen, so we know that you found something, and especially if you used some of the resources that we talked about this evening. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to True Lewis, who is going to bid you adieu for the evening.
Thank you, Nika. So we want to thank everyone for another great episode, and much appreciation to our special guest, Christopher Haley, and everyone just for joining BlackProGen Live tonight. Don't forget to keep the conversation going on over at YouTube and Twitter. Tweet us out. Let us know how you're doing, and we'll see you next Tuesday on the 20th of February at 9 p.m. for our 52nd episode, Deconstructing the Freedmen's Bureau. So good night, everyone.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint. The place where evidence tells the stories.